Hello, I'm Michael Marsh, and with me is Rachel Hanson. And recently, you may have seen my program, The Constitutionalist, where I talked about GMOs and organic crops and all that. And this is going to be this is a follow-up, and it's going to be going into a little more detail and maybe branch out a little bit. But I'm very concerned about the food that we eat, because I do like to eat. And so that's why I've invited Rachel on with me today, so that she can tell us about what we're eating, because, taste is good, but not everything that tastes good is actually
Yes.
good for us, unfortunately. Yeah, I know.
That donut you had for breakfast?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Or the ice cream I had
Yeah.
recently. Yeah, but I want to talk about that because it's going to be a growing. It is a growing issue of, are we going to continue being able to feed ourselves, and is the food that we're eating good for us?
Yeah.
So, Rachel, first off, tell us how you got to be an expert in this and what.
An
Got you
expert.
into it.
I'm not.
Maybe not an expert.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I really became interested in nutrition in, before college, and just things happening and realizing that, wow, what we eat actually does affect us. And I've definitely had a lot of experiences with that and growing up. And so I studied nutrition science. I figured, even if I don't use this as a profession, I will most definitely use it in my own life. So luckily, being able to work at Natural Grocers, I know I've been able to actually expand a lot of my knowledge on that, because we're very based, we have our founding principles, and one of them that we're based off of is providing nutrition science. So a science-based education, and not just, oh yeah, this is healthy, eat it, but what's the science behind it, and why is it that way? And so.
So you have a degree from a university?
Yes, from Oregon State. Yeah, so a degree in nutrition science and chemistry. Yeah.
Bachelor of Science?
Bachelor's of Science, yeah.
Good. Now, we talked a little bit about the plant side, but we haven't really gotten into the animal side of, because I know, like, a lot of dairy cows are given hormones and
Yes.
Antibodies. Tell
Yeah.
us about why they're doing that, and is that really a good idea?
I'll be pretty blunt about that. No, it's not. So, really a major reason why they're having to do what you're talking about is because of how inhumane the conditions are, and how a confinement dairy is they're too packed in there and too unsanitary conditions, so they have to give them things like subtherapeutic doses of antibiotics so that they actually can, live, right, without getting sick all the time. And the scary thing is the antibiotics that are used are often the same ones that we use for humans, where does that lead us?
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the times they'll use that as a growth hormone, like a growth promoter. They'll also use asthma medications, so different ones like clenbuterol. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but that actually promotes growth as well. And so, we look at a chicken, and most of them in those poultry farms, they can't even walk because the breast is so large that they just, that's what they do. They just sit in a small area and can't necessarily, live a normal life. So, at Natural Grocers, we now have, this is our 60th year, and now this month we're actually setting the new standards for, we're the first large company to actually ban confinement dairy as well as confinement animal products, which I think is huge, because do you know the percentage of animals that come from confinement in the States?
Probably a whole lot.
Like 85%.
Ouch.
Yeah, it's a lot. 80 to 85%. And so what the standards now we have to put into place because of how dangerous the methods are of growing them. So one of the standards is that they are at 120, they're 120 days pastured, and we'll talk about that and how it actually, when they're grazed and able to forage, they have a much better nutrient profile when we eat the meat because it's not just, oh, it tastes good, but are we getting the nutrients from it? They're never fed animal byproducts, which why should an animal be eating animal byproducts, in my opinion? But
especially like, I know they were doing this with cows for a long time, and cows are not meat eaters, but they're eating other cows.
Yes.
Now, I've heard one theory that this is what led to the mad cow disease. Is that accurate or not?
Yeah, they're not supposed to be eating the tissue of the same breed, right?
Yeah.
So, but by animal byproducts, they also mean that it's legal to dry blood, like old blood, and grind it into feed. They're able to put in feathers, from poultry, which, keep in mind that these different growth promoters, these asthma medications and other organic arsenics that are used to promote growth, they actually give, the animals ingesting arsenic. And for a poultry, it's been proven that their feathers, that's where they excrete the arsenic. So then we're grinding that up, putting it into our animal feed, and then they're ingesting even more. And then when they, excrete their feces, where does that go? Into the environment, right?
Yeah.
And then also back into the animal feed, because it's not regulated to use, it's not against the law to use dried animal feces in food. And they're also able to use bone meal as well. So, and dead, dying, and diseased animals like elk and deer. So what is that, roadkill?
Yeah.
yeah. So that is something that we will ban from the store. That's not, we ensure that the animal products that we carry will never have that. And like I said, it's a little bit alarming. We have to make those standards, right? So also the animals will never be given antibiotics, hormones, growth promoters, which is a really big thing, and they're able to exhibit normal lifestyle factors, right? And we talked a little bit about GMOs, but the animals that we carry, their products and dairy, will never be given GMO alfalfa, which is a big crop. So that's kind of neat. But a lot of these animals that are fed, the byproducts and the GMO alfalfa, a lot of them are based off of, GMO corn, GMO soy, GMO alfalfa, and that's the bulk of their feed, and what it's used for is to fatten them up, right?
Yeah. Now, the antibodies, we already know that, that could, because we're eating it, and they are, makes us resistant to being, we get sick, and then they don't
We're
work
not
on
able
us.
to use it. Yeah, we're not.
The growth hormones, that's just recently started becoming a concern, but I've noticed over the last few years that girls are developing, I don't know as much about guys, but it's not as obvious with guys, but, girls 9, 10 years old.
Yeah, that's been a big concern, yeah. And, the growth promoters are actually what we call endocrine disruptors, so they disturb our hormone system. And so if you're ingesting a lot of this, and this is a major part of your diet and your hormones, that's, at what age are your hormones developing, right?
Yeah.
And so it messes with that, which is pretty...
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a word for it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've seen, I've had I worked with a guy, and he brought his daughter to a meeting one time, and I asked him how old she was, and he said 10. I said, I will pray for you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be scary for a parent.
Yeah. Yeah, and part of it, I feel like there's a lack of education as to how this, you know what I mean? In some ways, I feel like we are supposed to trust that what's on our grocery shelf is safe to eat.
Yeah.
In most cases, it's not, so it's really being your own advocate and finding what can we do to change that, and what are the best choices I can make, so.
And so how do we make these choices? You mentioned in the first program that there's different levels of labeling on organic, and I'm assuming that probably
there is. Yeah, so do you know, I'm sure you've seen a lot, the natural label, right? Do you know what that refers to?
Not really.
Yeah. So this is why I asked, because, for years I have people telling me all the time, oh, it's natural, it's fine. I think, oh my gosh, no, that only all of those things that we just talked about, the being fed animal byproducts, the being fed hormones and antibiotics, and all of those things, and the inhumane conditions, that's all legal to do, and then still be labeled natural, because natural only has to do with how it's that it's not chemically altered after slaughter, right? And that it's it's minimally processed after slaughter, and that the meat is not chemically altered, right? Now, okay, natural is not natural, right?
Yeah.
So what you would really want to look for is something that says naturally raised, because that has to do with, that actually takes into account the animal's life, right? So that it's naturally raised, it's not being given all of these other things, and that has some standard, some push behind it, right? Some meaning behind it. And so you would also really want to look for something that is organic. So just to give you another example, something that's grass-fed. There's no law behind just saying grass-fed. You would have to say grass-fed with, a USDA organic seal, and then also even 100% grass-fed. That mean, or grass-fed and then grain-finished. So, like I said earlier, all the animals that we sell have at least 120 days pastured, where for a lot of other animals that doesn't happen. They're confined and everything is brought to them, right? Yeah. And so, like I said, you'd want to look for an organic symbol. You would want to look for something that said, grass-fed, maybe grain-finished, so that you knew that it was grass-fed for a certain point, and then also 100% grass-fed. And it would have, you can even get the certified humane stamp of approval on there, which is a really good thing to look for as well.
Because that's looking at the whole lifestyle.
Yeah.
Whether you're out in the pasture or in a barn.
Yes.
Type thing.
Yeah.
Okay. We talked in the first program about the genetically modifying plants for pesticides.
Yeah.
Be their own pesticide or to resist pesticide. Okay, let's talk about that a little more in depth.
Yeah. So we were talking about the two different ways, so that it will be modified, so that a plant will be modified so that it will produce its own, insecticide or herbicide, and then one that is then resistant to high amounts of, say, Roundup or a pesticide. And so that, is pretty alarming, because then we have plants that we're spraying that can withstand higher amounts, but then they're also producing their own. And the big thing is, what happens when we eat those things that are producing their own? Yeah. And
and what about, because bees don't read signs, saying, okay, this is genetically modified, this is not genetically engineered, this is not. And they're going to be going back and forth.
A lot of the plants that have been genetically modified to produce their own insecticide, do you know what their own, what it's special for?
Bees.
Well, so the insects, if insects go to maybe eat the seed or the plant, that it will produce something inside its gut that actually punctures little holes in it, so that it won't be able to survive.
So that would definitely cut down on a honey supply.
Yeah, and just all sorts of insects. I mean, we have this whole biodiversity that's a big thing. Yeah, we need that diversity. We need those insects that maybe, we don't always want pests to eat our whole crops, but it's, they're there for a reason. Yeah. So, and a huge part of that too is that by overspraying these things, things can evolve, they can change, they can then become resistant to that. They call them super weeds and super pests, so that they now can withstand this. So, then we have runoff into the environment and all of that.
Yeah, and it seems like, if they're using this, and I imagine they're doing the same thing for herbicides as well. And so it seems that, and there's going to be some cross-pollination.
Yeah.
And so it would have to become stronger, even if it wasn't by natural adaptation, just the cross-pollination.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing about it, is that it's not just a natural selection. It's not just naturally happening. It's that we're forcing it to happen. Yeah. We're forcing it without knowing what will come in the end. Yeah.
And that brings up another question: is how many studies have actually been done to see what the results are going to be, how they're going to
not
affected?
necessarily are there a lot about genetically modified and genetically engineered, but if you think about how many there are about, pesticide and pesticide residue, and so that is a big thing where, okay, if we're having plants that are overly sprayed and then they have a residue on them, we now know the long-term effects. We're still GM, crops and being genetically engineered, it's still pretty young, and there haven't been any long-term studies. I think we have a really good idea, but some people don't want to admit it, As far as I know, there's really only one trusted human study out now. I think they're working on others, but how soon will we know? I don't think a 3-month, scientific trial on how it affects us is really going to be a big thing, but definitely the fact alone about, the pesticide residue and things like that is a big one. That there's an interesting study by the CDC that they did. They took 9,000 and 200 people between the ages of 6 and 59, and they tested the metabolites of what's called organophosphorus, so OPs. They're metabolites of pesticides, to test whether or not there was anything detectable levels in the human, and 94% of them had detectable levels.
Wow. And
so there was another study that they took children, and for 5 consecutive days they put them on just organic produce, so they were having a much more reduced level of pesticide residue, and the levels of metabolites that they tested in the urine was much lower, and then they put them on long-term diets of organic, and there was no detectable levels. And so I know people argue a lot, well, there's still pesticides sprayed on a certain level, and the thing is that the residue that's left is much, those are plant-based, not synthetically made chemical pesticides, and all of these pesticides are linked to, they're linking them to cancers and Asperger and heart disease and all of these modern diseases we have. Yeah.
So, what do they have a pretty good idea about how increased the cancer rate would be, or
that I'm not sure of, at a number value, but I'm gonna have to look into that, because that's a really interesting side of it. I think another part too with even just organic produce and things like that people, I always get the question, are they actually more nutritious? And often people will argue, no, they look the same, they're fine, right? Yeah. But in a lot of my studies, you read these different journals of nutrition and things like that they're finding. So a plant, here we were talking about pesticides, that a plant that is, not sprayed and it's maybe organically raised, that when it grows, we always know that it has vitamins and minerals that it gets, but it also creates phytochemicals. So a plant's natural kind of defense system, which are wildly beneficial to us, right? Like antioxidants, we've got flavonoids, lycopene, lutein, all of these other things that we know are healthy for us. So a plant that's not sprayed, that's organic, it produces more because it's its self-defense system to outside, maybe stressors like pests and diseases and things like that. Whereas something that is being sprayed at high levels, it doesn't need to then produce those phytochemicals, those nutrients, because it's done, right? It's being done for it. So it becomes lazy. Someone called it a fat plant, right? Or something that's awful. Just that it's a lazy plant. So that's, they also have been showing that they do have higher levels of vitamin C, and I think it was a tomato that it was actually 79 to 90% more had higher levels of vitamin C than a conventional. Same with blueberries and kiwis. So that right there is, yes, it does have, we forget about those micronutrients, those small nutrients that actually we need for a lot of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get a brain freeze every once in a while.
We all do.
So, speaking, tomatoes, I've had people, especially, older friends, say that tomatoes actually taste different now than they were growing up.
Oh, really? Yeah. I know a lot of people say that, and that maybe if they're smaller, you know, it's, if you think about it, they're more nutrient dense, right? They may weigh more and they're smaller. They're more nutrient dense, but I've heard a lot of people say that it tastes a lot different. One thing I advise people to go look at too, because they often argue that, well, I can't spend this much on organic produce, or you know, it's way too expensive, which I feel like there's a lot of places that you can seek these out and not necessarily be breaking the bank. But the Environmental Working Group online, they actually have what's called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So they say they test the pesticide residues on each of these plants and rank them for which ones you absolutely need to buy organically because they have the highest amount of pesticide residue, and then also a list of ones that if you can't afford or you can't find organically, that they're safer at the conventional side of things. But
okay, do
yeah.
you happen to have that list?
I
with
do,
you?
yeah. So the Dirty Dozen includes apples, celery, cherry tomatoes, cucumbers, grapes. So these ones are sprayed the most. And then nectarines, peaches, potatoes, spinach. Then we've got snap peas, strawberries, sweet bell peppers, and they've kind of added a little clause in there that you should buy kale and collards and peppers in organically, because they do have a residue. So the Clean 15 would be asparagus and avocados, and then cabbage, cantaloupe, cauliflower, sweet corn, which, I mean, you have to be careful about GMO.
Yeah.
And then eggplant, grapefruit, and kiwi. And then also mangoes, onions, papayas, which again, papayas, you have to be careful. They're not genetically modified from Hawaii, right?
Yeah.
And then pineapples, sweet peas, and sweet potatoes. So again, if people ever wanted this list on the EWG, so environmentalworkinggroup.org, I believe, they give you like a little wallet-sized list that you kind of just turn around, and it's got both of those on there, which is nice to be able to carry. I see all the time at the store people checking their list, making sure that they're buying, you know. I mean, we do feature only 100% organic produce, but for those that shop in multiple areas, it's nice to know. So
Yeah, definitely.
I just love walking in and knowing when I shop at my store that I don't have to go and check, okay, which one do I want? Like, do I have to make an option? Do I have to? A lot of places it's really hard to know what is what because it's not labeled clearly, but I like knowing that.
Yeah, I have noticed the labeling could be better. Yeah,
Yes.
and as you mentioned earlier, in the first program at least, and I think a little bit in this one, that there are different levels of like organic and different levels of all these things.
Do you want to go over those again?
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, for something that's labeled, there's kind of three labels I think about: is 100% USDA organic, and then made with organic ingredients. So those made with organic ingredients, you've got it has to be at least 70% organic. So those ingredients must be at least 70% organic. And the other 30%, they don't have to be approved ingredients, so they could be anything, right? Which a little bit scary. And then the 95, the organic seal, so the organic label is with the USDA seal is 95% or more has to be organic, and then the other remaining ingredients must still fall under the organic standards. So no genetically modified organisms or anything like that. And then the 100% organic USDA organic certification, that seal, that means that everything in there is 100% organic. So there's no synthetic pesticides or chemicals, and no for animal products, no hormones, no antibiotics. They're not genetically modified, anything like that.
Now, in the on the ballot measure that we voted on in the last election, there was some confusion about, okay, if it had passed, okay, what would the standards have been? What would have been, because there is some animal products that are probably genetically modified as well, and plants
that would
are
be
engineered. So how would they? What would the standards be, or have they figured that out yet?
I guess I'm not sure, like, if the ballot would have passed,
Yeah.
would they have, so it would be no, from my understanding of it, it would be no genetically modified organisms or the derivatives. So that would be, like corn has multiple derivatives, soy has multiple derivatives. Yeah, so it would, and for animals, a big thing that's the bovine growth hormone that they often use in confinement is that they will use that, and that is genetically modified often. So it's the milk of that and the meat of that would then be something you would have to label and let people know. But sadly, that's not happening. Hopefully sometime we will change it. I know the vote was so close, but I think a big part of that is the education, is the clarity of it. What does it mean? I know a lot of money went into advertising on both sides. That how do you know? How do you know what to trust? So we at our store have a big set for the law where we had we called them customer literature files. So I've got this huge filing cabinet of just science-based nutrition education, and so I pulled the ones out for genetically modified and organic and things like that, and put them out for people to know so that they could educate themselves and then be more aware of what they wanted on that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, like, and the meat products, there's also the milk, like I said, milk, cheese, and all this other
ice cream. You can't.
Cream.
Your ice cream.
I love ice cream.
Who doesn't?
So, where do we go from here?
It's definitely up to the consumers at this point. It needs to be the new standard so that those companies that are still using, that are using GMOs and using these things and kind of thriving off of them, we need to let them know that this isn't what we want. We need to follow things like buying, vote with your dollar. Vote that you want this to be the new standard. I know there's a lot of companies that are now kind of trying this non-GMO verified seal to see, does it actually increase sales? Because if it does, that's the new standard. No major company wants to be the fall behind. They don't want to be playing catch up, right? They want to be right up there with them. So if we all know that that's what we want, that's how we're going to have to change it. It could be a slow process, but it's the way, it could get done.
Yeah. And I haven't really noticed very much in the way of, like if you buy milk, it doesn't usually say whether it's they've used hormones or antibodies.
So a lot of them will say like they don't use like the the bovine hormone, but you would have to look for one that is says naturally raised, or it would say USDA organic. You would have to really look for that because it is really hard to find, or not hard to find. It's just hard to know that label, right? Yeah.
You have to know what you're looking for.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Most of us don't.
So I hope this helped some people learn how to look for it more, and I invite people to come and ask more questions and join some of our classes. They can always look at naturalgrocers.com and look at Salem, the Salem store and our event page, and I have all of my listed classes on there.
Okay, so how would they look you up again?
At naturalgrocers.com. You would then find the Salem store, and you would go to the events page. So you would see my picture on there, and I would be next to the classes I'm teaching, and we also often get guest presenters in as well.
Okay.
So, and the classes are always free. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're out of time.
Okay.
Thank you.